4th annual 3D Horror Cinema Specials. I'm your host, 3D Jake, and today we are looking at Salem's Lot, released in 2004. Salem's Lot was directed by Michael Solomon and was written by Peter Filaderi and stars Rob Lowe, Andre Brower, Donald Sutherland, Samantha Mathis, Dan Beard, James Cromwell, and Rutger Hauer. The movie is really more of a TV special or a miniseries, much like Stephen King's Salem's Lot, which came out in 2004. There is one from the 70s that you're aware of that was directed by Tobe Hooper. I will cover that one in the future, but this one never gets talked about, mostly because it's hard to find unless it's on Prime Video for you, but you have to rent it as of now, and it's on DVD. There is no physical Blu-ray release, but I really enjoy this version because it's really well done and well made, and Rob Lowe doesn't get talked about enough. Although there is some problems with the story, I really enjoyed this as a whole. And I will say, I'm a huge Salem's Lot fan. I love the book growing up, okay? I love this book so much so to where when I wanted to watch this movie, I found out there was two movies, and I saw the 70s one and loved it. And then I found out there was a 2004 film that was they're both basically TV movies, so essentially, because they're 3 or 4 hours long. And so I watched the Tobe Hooper one first, and I own that on Blu-ray, and that is a great movie. And then I watched this one, and this one I just enjoyed much more because I felt like it captured what the book was supposed to capture. Although, I will say there are certain things in the Tobe Hooper film that I think was better than this film. For instance, I really enjoyed this movie. The story is essentially about an Arthur who had a traumatic experience in Jerusalem's Lot, comes back to town, and basically is trying to buy this house that he was haunted in years ago. And of course, a vampire buys the house, and then the vampire and his familiar go around town like they're draining the town dry, turning all the children, all the adults into vampires. So much so to where it's up to another child, the Arthur, and a couple of other people, a priest, a school teacher, and the love of the Arthur's life, to basically defend the town because at night they're coming to kill them all. I really enjoyed this story. It's a great story by Stephen King, and I will say there are things about Stephen King stories that I like and dislike. I always think that Stephen King always has the thing I call the filibuster, where it feels like it just sits there it feels like Stephen King writes half a story and then the other half is a filibuster where it's I got it in this somehow and I just can't. And so I think that's what's my issue with Stephen King is there always is a fucking subplot in this movie. In any story he writes, there's always a fucking subplot. And in this story, the main story is about the vampires, but yet the fucking book, and especially in this movie, I like that Tobe Hooper kept the focus on the vampires. This one is more faithful to the Stephen King book in certain aspects. First off, in the book, they go to Mexico, and in this adaptation, they go to New York. Well, or Detroit, sorry. Sorry, I'm just trying to block Detroit out of my head. So, yeah, Detroit. And so they basically go to Detroit, which basically, basically that's where vampires run to. They gotta say, we gotta run somewhere. The vampires go somewhere where there's destruction and there's nowhere, it's empty cities that nobody will ever be found. Detroit. I was like, I just like to think that. I always like to think that because I always like to give Detroit a hard time. But I always like to think the vampires we need to go somewhere nobody will ever find us that looks like death already came to it. Detroit. But no. But yeah, it's not even the vampire that goes to Detroit in a way, but still. Basically, yeah. So basically, yeah, this basically is Arthur attacks a priest in Detroit, and then he's trying to tell a nurse all his story, and then basically you take it back to a couple of months ago, where basically he was traveling up there, and he's writing a book about the town, and and of course about his experience in the ghost house, the Marston house, and basically his traumatic experience as a kid, and then of course if the shady realtor sells it to a vampire, and so the vampire is welcome into the town and then drains the town dry. And yeah, so basically that. And I will say Rob Lowe is great in this movie. Rob Lowe is fantastic. And I would even say Andre Brower and Donald Sutherland, I think, gives the best performance out of everyone, because Donald Sutherland just plays an evil, evil man. Like, he's basically the familiar of Barlow. Barlow's the main vampire by Rutger Hauer, who basically, I feel sometimes I feel like he is doing a great job. And then sometimes I feel like he just doesn't give a shit about his performance in this movie. Because I'm watching this going, there are parts of this movie, especially whenever he attacks, when he attacks Dan Birds, who's the little boy in the movie, who he basically goes to he basically discovers Barlow's a vampire and everything, and kills his familiar, and then Barlow seeks revenge against him in the movie. Spoilers. And so Barlow goes to attack him and kills his mother. And I will say, that I liked. I thought that was great. Especially how you have, because they're trying, that by this point in the movie, they know, okay, look, the entire town is dying because of Barlow. And so they're trying to basically, they try to contain it by going into the Marsden house, and they kill, all the vampires there. But then it turns out that Barlow's not there, and that means that he's going to be able to just infect the entire town. And I will say, I do like how in the 1970s film, Barlow looks more like Nosferatu. But in this one, and even in the book, because they're trying to base this more off the book, Barlow's just like a regular handsome guy, which I guess they thought, who's a handsome guy? Rutger Hauer. They're like Blade Runner. Imagine him as Barlow, Well, there is a new film, by the way, coming out on Max called Salem'S Lot, but this one is a very different version. So don't expect, if you like the book, it's more like, this is the same people that made It and Annabelle. So they're pretty much took they basically remade it, but they took a lot away from the book. So if you're expecting like a faithful adaptation, you're going to be very disappointed. So it's just a spiritual remake in a way. It's not really an adaptation. I'm just pointing that out. But this one, I feel like really, I felt so bad watching this, because I'm like, there are things I love in this movie, and because I loved this movie as a kid, and then I'm rewatching this movie, and I still like it, but I noticed a lot of flaws in this movie. Like, for one, there is a editing mistake in this movie where there is a doctor who basically in the movie cheats on this woman. He's literally like this woman who's a high school sweetheart of his, whatever. Basically, she's flirting with him, and basically her husband's abusive, and so he's flirting with her, and then basically, she basically asks for a ride home, but you never ever see him offer her a ride home. They're just talking, and then the next thing you know, he's driving her home, and I'm like, they never even get to that. I'm like, did they delete that, or did they just, I honestly thought, did something skip? I literally had to rewind it, because I'm like, there's no way that just cuts to that. They're not even talking. It isn't like she says, hey, can I have a ride, and then cut. No, that would have made sense. And it just made me like, oh my God, that is an editing mistake. I'm like, oh my God. What? I'm sitting there watching this. And on top of that, sometimes Rutger Hauer, how Barlow is introduced in the original 70s version. You don't see Barlow, really, his face, until, he's at Will's house. And basically he shows up, kills his parents, and that's the scene with the priest. They do that scene in this movie, but you see you see how evil Nosferatu looking. The monster never even speaks, because you can't understand his language. So his familiar speaks for him. That's in the Tobe Hooper version, and that's so powerful. But in this version, Rutger Hauer does it. And the first time you see him in the movie is when he's sitting there. There basically is a guy with a disability who is kind of mentally challenged. And so basically he's sitting there burning the trash, and then he's spray painting graffiti because he likes this high school girl. Yeah, there's some weird shit in this movie. He likes a high school girl who, by the way, he's a grown-ass man who likes a high school girl, has a crush on Larry Crockett's daughter who is in high school. And there's a whole fucking subplot about how this dude is also, by the way, Larry Crockett's sexually abusing his daughter, by the way. Yeah, that's a whole fucking subplot in this movie too. And basically, he's spray painting on the thing. His friend sucks. And basically, Barlow's just sitting there in a trench coat and a hat and glasses, just looking at the fire. And I'm just the way he's introduced, I'm like, this looks like somebody's grandfather. It doesn't even look like Barlow. Like, he looks younger. And I understand. I guess their idea was when they introduced Barlow, I'm guessing from the script, and I'm just throwing them some bragging rights, okay? I'm guessing my idea is when they introduced Barlow, he's supposed to be an old man. And then as the movie progresses, he's getting younger because he's getting more, feeding more. I guess like the way Dracula in the book Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, how he starts out like an old ass man and then becomes Gary Oldman. Like and so yeah, and so I think that's how they were planning on doing it, because he starts out as, I'm like, that's your first appearance of Barlow, the villain, the evil villain. He looks like, just like someone's grandfather talking, and it just seems like they just put Rutger Hauer in a suit. It doesn't even look like they aged him up or nothing. And then like they later try to make him look younger, which I was kind of like looking, going, they literally just give him a soul patch, and that's how he looked younger. And I'm just laughing because I'm like, it's like, it almost reminds me of the thing that me and my friend Ryan Crying Cam joke about, where we say in Saw how they make Jigsaw look younger. They put a hat on backwards to make him look younger. Well, that's not how you look younger. It just feels like in this movie they gave Rutger Hauer a soul patch and said younger. That does not make you look younger. It just makes you. I mean, they're just saying that shit like that is what made me. I was like, wow, that's a dumb choice. Rob Lowe is great in this movie, and I really enjoy his arc. And I think Donald Sutherland's great, and Andre Braugher, and Samantha Mathis. I feel like she doesn't have much to do in this movie. I feel like she just basically is just Rob Lowe's love interest, and then she becomes a vampire, and that's it. And then they give, basically she's there at the end to give backstory. Like, oh, don't worry, you didn't kill. By the way, this is what pissed me off the most at the end, is when after the whole entire town is vampires. They go out there, okay, basically, she's a vampire. After they kill Barlow and everything, they go out there and she's a vampire, and then she explains, oh, don't worry, I found out, because, you didn't really kill, because there's a whole backstory about how Barlow, whenever he was a little boy, Ben Mears went into the town. He went into like the Marston house, and apparently the family all had died, and he thought, because he was a coward, he just frozen and panicked in fear, laid on the ground, and he swore he could hear the little boy dying in the tub, and if he would have been more of a brave soul, he could have saved the boy's life. But it turns out that boy had been dead, and it's just a ghost of the house or something that was there. And so she basically, in vampire form, by the way, explains, oh no, you're cool, you really didn't do nothing bad or nothing, like, it wasn't your fault, you're like the vampire, like she explains all, like, oh no, the ghost, it was just a ghost that, that you heard, and the little boy was already dead and stuff, just stuff like that. And I'm like, why is she giving exposition right now? Shouldn't she be trying to lure him to the vampire side? Like, shouldn't she? Why are we having to explain this right now? Like, this is the worst time. And then she doesn't even really seem that she wants to kill him until, like, the little boy comes back and goes, yeah, the whole town's ready, full of vampires still. And I'm just like, oh my god. Like, what the fuck? So, like, I watched this movie as a kid and I loved it, and then I rewatched it as an adult, and I'm like sitting there just going, I love this, I like the movie, I still do, but like there's a lot of fucking issues in this movie to where I'm like, I can see why it doesn't have a wider appeal compared to the Hooper film, because the Hooper film like cut straight to the point. Like, we got rid of that haunted house shit. The house just there because it's just his lair. Like, and I'm hoping that the new film, that's the same thing. It's like the haunted, it's just a house where he stays. It's nothing to do with a fucking ghost, okay? Like, that is the biggest piece of shit idea ever that Stephen King had, where it's like, I don't give a shit about a haunted house in a vampire film. It's literally like it'd be like if you're watching John Carpenter's The Thing, and then there's a subplot that MacReady once, got abducted by alien. No, that'd probably be like, I mean, maybe, yeah, he got abducted by aliens, and he's like, yeah, man, I got abducted. I mean, that's actually a plot in Independence Day. Never mind. Be like if MacReady was like, once I got haunted, I was in a haunted house, and then he was explaining like why he doesn't travel a lot. I mean, just like, you're like, where does this have to do with the story, the main story? This has nothing to. It feels like it's a filibuster. That's all it is. Which a filibuster is something you just say nonstop. Like if in Congress, like you're just saying something just so that way to pass time. It's something. It's really stupid that that we have that in Congress. But yeah, filibusters are really dumb. It's just like basically you have the mic and you're allowed to just say whatever the fuck you want for like as long as you have time. Which you have time for, I guess, an infinite amount of time with a filibuster, which is dumb. I mean, by the way, if you ever want to know what a filibuster is, watch Patton Oswalt talk about Star Wars in Park and Recreations. That's basically what a filibuster is. You know, so yeah, but yeah, I do like. I've been shitting on this movie a lot. I'm just gonna get to the point where I do like the story. I think the story's great. You know, from like I think from the vampire aspect, I like how it progresses. But the haunted house thing is what I'd cut out. Then I think it would make the movie because it has nothing really to do with the movie other than just give it a backstory to Ben Mears. I think honestly, if you would have cut that, it would not really change much of the movie. I like that, and I like the acting from everybody except sometimes Rutger Hauer. I feel like he sometimes underacts, and I think that was the issue. Now it turns out he actually did read some of his lines of cue cards because he just didn't bother to memorize them, which is kind of broke my heart a little bit. I did think the vampires looked really cool and spooky, especially there's a really cool scene where they're on the like wall on the bus. That I thought was really creepy and iffy. And I do like that how like, you know, there's like a scene where a dad wakes up and his son is eating his mom. You know, that's really cool too and everything, and I like aspects of that is what I really like, but sometimes it feels either it's too campy. Sometimes with like a woman gets across, the vampire gets across the and then she flies up and then turns to dust. You know, stuff like that. I think is where it was kind of it's not scary. It's just dumb. And if it wasn't for that, I would really like this movie. And I just think from from like an unbiased perspective, if I had to give this movie a score, I would give this movie a B. Thank you so much.